to do a ninja quick demonstration of a handful of Erlang web frameworks. My missed introductions, my name is Jesse Gum. All these slides are going to be available online. I'm going to cover briefly. There's three basically full web frameworks that do all kinds of things left and right that are not necessarily just pure server-based kind of stuff. That's Nitrogen, ChicagoBoss, and Zotonic. There are, due to the triviality of making a server with Erlang, there's a million web servers behind the scenes. Web Machine, of course, is the gold standard when it comes to doing HTTP stuff. Otherwise, there's Yaws, which is kind of the old, tried and true, basically modeled after Apache but built with Erlang. There's Cowboy, which is kind of the new guy on the scene, which is fast and WebSockets and all kinds of fun stuff. Mochi Web is also old and true, but and is pure Erlang, but is kind of in more of a maintenance mode. It's not really getting any new features these days. And there's iNets. I'll skip over Erlang briefly because I don't know much about it. iNets is the built-in web server built right into Erlang, so you don't have to do, if you want to just get something going right away without bringing in any dependencies. iNets is the way to go. And then Ellie is kind of another new one on the scene, similar to Cowboy in the light mode, the lightness of it, but it doesn't do WebSockets right now, and it isn't as reliant on the whole OTP architecture right now, which is kind of what makes Erlang so fantastic. The OTP and the supervision hierarchy and all that fun stuff that makes the whole 9 nines uptime concept of Erlang so fantastic. But I'm going to be mainly talking just about the full-featured ones in this, because getting into all the others, there's too many little things there. Currently, WebSockets are supported by Cowboy, Yaws, ChicagoBoss. We're using Cowboy as a backend. N2O, which is a fork of Nitrogen, stands for Nitrogen 2 Optimized. And then I'll come back to Simple Bridge, but WebSocket is coming to Simple Bridge soon. So, let's get to it. ChicagoBoss. Written by Evan Miller. He lives in Chicago. He's studying for a PhD in economics. ChicagoBoss was built to be essentially a Rails for Erlang. That's kind of the main thing. It comes with all the stuff you would expect, a database abstraction layer. They call them Boss records within Boss DB, and it does all kinds of neat code generation. Erlang is not exactly well known for being a meta-programmable language. It's doable, but that's part of what makes Elixir, another up-and-coming Erlang or Beam-based language, so popular is its meta-programming capabilities. Erlang, you have to deal with like Erl parse and all that stuff, and I honestly haven't done much of anything with that. But ChicagoBoss uses extensive rewriting of the parsing library, and it uses essentially like the ChicagoBoss code isn't pure Erlang. It won't compile without the Boss kind of back-end rewriting the source code. So that's like Unicode-based characters, I guess. In one of his talks, Evan mentioned that you can use like the backwards E that exists, like is a member of. Okay, you can like put that in your code, and that represents X is a member of whatever. It's crazy wonky stuff. It has an integrated mail server using GenSMTP, which is a very standard OTP compliant server framework kind of thing. I did some rewriting with it. It's real simple to write like a server where mail comes in, you do something with it, you send the mail out, handle it, do whatever. It's fantastic. Also has a framework-specific test suite that uses just for ChicagoBoss. I haven't done anything with it. I'll preface this, like I should say, I haven't done much with ChicagoBoss. This is basically what I know about it, and I'll do a brief demonstration. And then, of course, it uses Django templates. There's some controversy about ChicagoBoss. The biggest one, and the one that makes Evan Miller a heretic on the Erlang Questions mailing list, is the extensive use of parameter modules. If you are, who's familiar with Erlang? I know you're an Erlang guy. Okay. Erlang is not an object-oriented language. It is if you think about it like the small talk sense where it's like message passing, and a server is an object, you send a message to the server and it responds with whatever. But ultimately the core language is not an object-oriented language. Parameter modules are kind of a way of getting around that. They were an experimental feature introduced years ago. I don't know what version of Erlang introduced it, and it allowed you to define a module that has attributes. Those attributes would then be passed into each function, and then you could act on those attributes and return a new version of whatever object you're using.
It sounds like parameterized modules and MLs. Yeah, in the same way.
Okay.
So they are.
Yeah, so same concept. I haven't done ML since college, so I don't remember anything about it. Anyways, the use of parameter modules within Erlang is a highly theoretical perspective, and it was recently removed from the language. It was introduced as an experimental feature years ago. And then the Ericsson team decided, well, this isn't working out, we're going to remove it. So you removed it, and then they reintroduced when they removed it, they introduced a parse transform, another code rewriting construct that allows you to import and support parameter modules, but it's an unofficial kind of way of dealing with parameter modules. So anyways, there's 100 post threads on the Erlang questions forum, basically Evan versus everybody else about parameter modules, but it's heavy use in ChicagoBoss, and it's ChicagoBoss without parameter modules isn't ChicagoBoss. I mentioned the whole lots of parsing trickery, and then of course code generation that goes along with the boss record and the boss DB stuff, with generating functions in your code in your modules based on what your database schema. So anyways, here's a very brief, useless hello world example. It looks kind of like, this has a similar look to like what a web machine kind of thing looks like, except the way that this is structured. So MKEFP, this is the name of the project itself, named after this organization. Greeting is the initial path, hence this part of the greeting here. And then hello is the final part. So it's the controller, greeting is the controller, and hello is kind of the action. And then it's handled within the function, within the module itself, as you've got hello here, and then it returns an output of hello Evan. This little open close bracket, that's an indicator of parameters. If we were to tack stuff at the end of here, it would match against the parameters. So I'll show you a brief, I'll go to it. So this is pretty close to what I had in the example. If we were to load MKFP reading, that's nothing, it'll just respond with hello. The open and close thing that I just removed, all that's doing is that's pattern matching against the rest of the URL. Oh, I don't have anything in there, so we need something for it to pattern match against. So all I did was I added my name to the end of the URL, and it responded with hello Jesse. It's just, all it's doing is it's inserting that right into the output. If I throw in another thing at the end of it, it's going to break. And that's because we're not pattern matching for two objects. It's ultimately what it's doing is it's tokenizing against the slashes at the end of the URL. So if I were to say like other, this should work. So all it does is just tax the rest of it on there. We could ignore it. We could choose to ignore anything additional using Erlang's like matching the kind of thing. And then what did I do? Oh, yeah, I got it. So now, no matter what we doesn't matter. It's just good. So anyways, that's the brief hello world example of ChicagoBoss. So we'll go to something a little bit more useful, is the use of use of templates. The use of templates is the view part of MVC. You create a file within views, the name of your module, and the action that you want it to reply to. In this case, all I did was just hello name, my best of friends. So, if I were to go ahead and tweak this ever so slightly, just in case it. So, if we go to hello, instead of hello, notice how I call this action template. It means we have to change the action up here to template. And once again, put a name up here. So Joel. Hello, Joel, my best of friends. So, all it's doing, to explain what this is doing, is this is turning one into, it's a common construct. Here's an Erlang prod list, which is it's a tuple, it's a list of 2 tuples, with name with lowercase being the token that's going to be inserted into the template, and name in uppercase being the variable. In Erlang, anything that starts uppercase is a variable. This name lowercase is an atom. If we reply with atom this will tell ChicagoBoss to go look for that template. So we'll find our template, which is right here, and just using these like angle brackets, it'll see the lowercase name and know that we're going to find whatever variable that we need to replace in there from that prop list that we passed for the return. So that's kind of the basic ChicagoBoss introduction, without getting into the heavy stuff, because frankly I don't know tons of it. So from there, you can do tons and tons of things. Like I mentioned, it supports WebSockets and mailing in and out and all kinds of stuff. Lots of people have made a lot of cool internet apps, but I'm not one of them. So there's a handful of resources if you're interested in ChicagoBoss. There's a PDF, which is kind of a 35-page, print it off and read through it, whatever. So any questions on ChicagoBoss that I can answer? Okay, moving on. Moving on to the Nitrogen Web Framework. Original author is Rusty Klothouse. He used to work at Basho. I am the current maintainer of it. He passed it to me when he was too busy with things. So I'm kind of biased because I actually know the inners of how all this works for Nitrogen. And the homepage is nitrogenproject.com. The thing that makes Nitrogen different from ChicagoBoss, the thing that makes Nitrogen unique kind of within itself, it is it's an event-driven framework. It uses kind of a construct similar to the Erlang's Gen server pattern matching thing. There's a built-in event in every page, and you can interact with postbacks, and then those postbacks match against the event handlers on each page, and that makes it kind of interesting. You're not really dealing so much with it's not an MVC framework. I'll mention that it's not MVC. And the thing that makes it particularly unique is that it takes use of Nitrogen elements, which they're basically Erlang records, which is kind of controversial. I mentioned that on the controversy page. It uses Erlang records as a construct of building basically a web-focused DSL, so that you can essentially represent a whole page, a whole application. You can write a hugely rich application without writing a line of JavaScript, even though this is a web application. And it's because it uses these nitrogen elements for generating HTML, for generating your own invented HTML constructs. You make a custom thing that does a whole handful of things but you can just call it one thing, pass it a couple of things. And it's no different from writing a function that takes a bunch of parameters, but it gives a kind of a syntactical clarity without having to, fight with function definitions everywhere, mixed in with HTML, mixed in with whatever constructs you're dealing with. So, and then of course there's a whole pile of JavaScript stuff that gets generated based on these nitrogen elements. They're called action elements, and all they do is they just translate an Erlang record into a JavaScript function, which is, it just makes your page clean because you're not dealing with HTML. It also supports a framework-specific HTML templating language, much more rudimentary than something like Django templates. They're basically just built-in Erlang functions that you call from your HTML code. That flag back either to the current page that you're on or to like a library function in another module. And then, of course, there's a pile of handlers for like rewriting, if you want to do session out to the database, or if you want to do sessions out to, if you want to use, gproc or something, just whatever, like rewrite the routing. So, controversy. Like I said, heavy use of Erlang records. Erlang records are they're generally shunned. The Erlang record syntax is kind of wonky, and a lot of people hate it. And people like to look at the Erlang records as an example of, well, this is why Erlang sucks. Aside from the fact that line endings are either space, comma, or comma, period, or semicolon. The Erlang records is kind of a weird construct, but it works perfectly in this particular perspective as for generating these constructs. And I'll show you kind of some examples here. It uses the process dictionary for storing context. The context contains things like queued function calls, queued JavaScript stuff that's going to be sent off to the server, or for maintaining. There's a page state that can be and then that gets sent off to the page and it's re-rendered with whatever. And then there is no built-in database integration. There's a pile of database things, and you can even use, because ChicagoBoss has BossDB as a separate application. You could bring BossDB in as a dependency for a nitrogen application and use that for your database interaction. Otherwise, there's MySQL, things, there's PostgreSQL, React is of course built with Erlang. There's adapters for everything. So that's not really a deal breaker as far as I'm concerned. So anyways, so as an example of a WebDSL with React, with use the nitrogen elements. That's pretty poorly phrased, huh?
What does it mean?
What does it mean? It basically means, like I mentioned, you can write HTML and JavaScript with Erlang terms. As an example, my shirt here, my bracket patch shirt, is this is my league and tournament management software that I built with Erlang. It's something like 30,000-ish lines of code or whatever. Maybe 500 lines of JavaScript. If that, probably more like 100, but I'm, hedging my bets. It's otherwise all written with Erlang stuff, just in pure Erlang, and then that gets re-rendered into JavaScript and HTML. It just makes it easy to, if you like Erlang, and you don't have to deal with JavaScript. So anyways, so a lot of elements, a lot of nitrogen elements, and then we get to see this Erlang record construct. The record construct starts with the £, with a hash, and then it's the name of the record. In nitrogen is, something like 150 or 200 built-in nitrogen elements that translate more or less directly, in some cases, directly. In this case, this is a span. This creates an HTML span. It's pretty straightforward. A panel creates an HTML div. We use panel because div is a keyword in Erlang, so you've got to kind of, if you got that. And then so we got span where the text is the body of it, the contents of the span tag would be some text in a span. the use of this text, instead of saying body, you can use text or body. If you say body, then it will print whatever is in there without cleaning it up. Whereas using text, it will acknowledge that it's text and it'll escape the HTML that's with it. So it's kind of a safer way of preventing the HTML injection kind of stuff. An easy way of doing it, I should say. And then we have a button here. The text is a button, and its action, in this case, is a postback that will just trigger the postback event button was clicked. And I'll get into postback shortly. Finally, as an example here, this is just demonstrating the idea of representing JavaScript with Erlang. So all this is saying is we're wiring to the button, some button, there's a button up here somewhere called with an ID, some button. It's wiring the event, a click event, that when it's clicked will trigger and just a basic JavaScript alert that says something. So that's a way of nicely composing things using Erlang constructs without having to break into writing strings or writing binaries or anything. So this is the most useless example of a hello world in nitrogen. You define the module, and the way that, whereas in ChicagoBoss, it was the name of the application, then an underscore, then the name of the controller, then an underscore, and the word controller for the module to indicate the controller, and then there was an action. In nitrogen, it's a little bit simpler, but it's not implying as many things as ChicagoBoss. In this case, it just has a simple entry point main. Everybody's familiar with the main function. Index is handled by the router. If you either do /index or /nothing, it'll go to index. And then all this will do is just print hello Mike onto the page. Very simple, very straightforward. This is a slightly more useful hello world, but of course, anything useful has a lot of code in it. So up at the top, we have the basic definition, index. We're exporting a bunch of functions, and the include library. Basically, anytime you're using anything with nitrogen elements, you have to have that. Include library at the top. Include the nitrogen or /include/w. You get used to writing it. It's about as much boilerplate as you have to deal with here. Then, of course, there's the main function, which in our case here we have a template that points to a file bare.html. Site templates bare.html. All it does is that loads the template bare. And I'll show you what that template is. So there's a pile. Let's see if we can. There we go. That's a little easy to read, I guess. It's not. Okay. So a handful of things to gather from here. The first is this. Here we have 3 square brackets and then page, title, and more square brackets. That page add translates directly to the page that we are on. Whatever page we're referencing, it will go back to that page. If it's anything but page, if we were to type in whatever, if we were typing whatever, then it would go to the whatever module and interject whatever there. So that's kind of how you do like a menu system that uses a universal module without having to always call back to the page. But in this case, we're just going to stick with this. So all this is going to do is this is going to take whatever is returned by the page title function in that page, in the current module, and put that in the title, in the HTML. Is that too small? Do you want me to make that bigger?
No, that's fine. I can see it.
Is it okay? Okay. Because I can do this guy. It's going to be easier.
Black and white.
Bam! A little bigger. Okay. That's a little better. You prefer black and white? Is the white kind of like glaring in your eyes?
No.
No. Okay. We'll whatever. Okay, so.
I mean white and black.
Oh, white and black, yeah. That's the. I don't know. You think the other one's easier to read? I think the other one's easier to read. Maybe it's because I'm old. Getting there. Okay, so as we can see here, a couple of things. Nitrogen uses jQuery extensively to run. So it's loading a jQuery that just comes with Nitrogen, has built-in validation stuff. There's a specific Nitrogen thing. BERT, which is a binary Erlang term representation library that converts Erlang terms from JavaScript into Erlang terms and back for convenient communication between an Erlang server and a web application. And then beyond that, CSS and all that fun stuff. And then of course we get to the meat of it. There's page body. Just like with page title, all it's going to do is it's going to call the body function of the current page. And then at the very end, we have to include this little script function. It's not even a function. It's just it's a template-specific construct that will inject any page JavaScript that needs to be handled after you've done all the fun stuff. Essentially anything that gets wired out to the page is the term is wired. Anything that gets wired out to the page will get sent in with the script, and then that facilitates the server, the client-server communication through postbacks and all that fun stuff. So, anyway. So as we can see, the main function calls that template, returns, prints my hello world in the title, and then in the body, it injects this panel. So I mentioned panel is just a keyword for div, and basically just has the text click below, see some magic. There's a BR, which just translates to a HTML BR tag, which, we could have written BR in there, but, we get the nice syntax highlighting for it. And then there's a button element with the ID of the button. The postback is click, and the text is click me, I dare you. This postback, then when you click it, will trigger this event on the server. Oh no, I mistyped it. It should be event. There we go. So event click, and all this is doing is this is literally using Erlang pattern matching of whatever this term is against this term. So this could be a tuple, this could be a list, it could be all kinds of fun stuff, and we can pattern match it against it. So that's how you can trigger like postbacks from lists and all kinds of fun stuff. And then in this case, we're just saying the body. That what we're going to do here is we're going to take the ID thing. We're going to build this panel called panel. That the ID is going to be the replacement, and the text is congrats you did it. And this WF replace function will merely find whatever object on the page is labeled the button and replace it with the new body. And that's kind of the bread and butter of building a basic Erlang-based web application. The standard example is when you build an Erlang page, it looks like this, which is just a longer version of what I had up there. And if we look at the code for this, we'll see the same basic construct. The stuff at the top, the main function that calls a template, a title, a body that contains a grid container, which ends up coming back out to here. And then we have this button. This is the key here. Yeah. The button, which just has the ID button, the text click me, and the postback is click. That postback will trigger this event click function and replace it with a panel. This panel has an action that does an effect, and so we'll see an action. So all it is just click me, and it replaces the text. All that done without. Woo! Sorry, that was the that's the hot code reloading thing. So we just loaded a pile of modules in Erlang because it was the first time that was used. So that wouldn't normally happen. That's just a like ground notification that the Nitrogen just loaded a pile of modules so you can add and remove and modify modules on the fly using Erlang's classic hot code reloading stuff to a running. Oh, there's more. let's turn them up. There we go. Notifications disabled. So it might still load stuff, but we don't have to see it. So that's kind of the basic hello world application for nitrogen. So I mean that's basic hello world. I'm not going into the full thing. I mean I could sit here and talk for like 5 hours, but I'm not going to because we don't have time for that. So if you're interested in any nitrogen-based stuff, check it out on the, there's a tutorial slideshow, the Twitter, mail, all that fun stuff, just like everything else. And I'll give a brief word here. Simple Bridge is, kind of going back to all those other servers. One of the things that's interesting about Nitrogen and ChicagoBoss is both of them run on top of those existing Erlang servers. So Simple Bridge is that glue that triggers it. So you can, with trivial code modifications, you can have the same application, and if you decide, well, okay, well, I built it with inets, and it's working okay, but I really need the performance of Cowboy. With a little bit of, change a couple lines of code, and you're running on top of Cowboy, and then you can take advantage. Or, say you have an application that you want to do really heavy, RESTful-based HTTP kind of stuff. It runs on top of Web Machine, if you want. You just compile Nitrogen with Web Machine, and then you have all the advantages of Web Machine. It's whole routing table and writing your own custom Web Machine modules that handle all that stuff. And then you can have like a Web Machine REST-based component to your server, all running on the same Erlang node. And then just make sure that your routing table points to Nitrogen for the richer, more full-featured part of your application. So it's a convenient way to do like a server that has a nice API to deal with, as well as having a full interactive JavaScript-rich kind of environment. So that Simple Bridge that provides that glue. So in this case, Nitrogen runs on top of Yaws, Cowboy, Mochi Web, inets, and Web Machine. ChicagoBoss currently can run on top of Mochi Web or Cowboy. Soon ChicagoBoss will support Yaws, and all of Simple Bridge will support Yaws with WebSockets. It'll provide a WebSocket abstraction there either for Yaws or for Cowboy if you have a preference. Some people want to write in Yaws, some people want to write in Cowboy. It's up to them. So, I'll briefly talk about Zotonic. Zotonic, written by Mark Warl, he's a friendly German guy. Originally, it was actually built as kind of a fork of Nitrogen. It used the Nitrogen actions and the interaction, but it got rid of the whole process dictionary. It was, understandably, the controversy of using the process dictionary is not a very functional, friendly way of dealing with things. So Zotonic got rid of the process dictionary part of that. And it branched into a full-featured CMS. So Zotonic is a full-on CMS, like, I don't know how it compares against stuff like Joomla or whatever else, but it's a full-on CMS. Has a whole pile of stuff, WebSockets, integrated email. It relies, I think, exclusively on Postgres database. I'm not super sure on that, but I think so. Uses Django templates, and then you can run multiple sites from a single Erlang instance. Pretty trivially, it provides like a nice panel backend kind of thing. I'm not aware of any controversies related to Zotonic. It's got a pretty friendly thing. But if you're not in a full-featured CMS, then you don't want to do it. I can't do a demo on Zotonic. I've never played with it, but I just thought I'd mention it. It's out there if you wanted to, quickly get a blog up or something without actually writing an application. Zotonic is the way to do it. So there's a pile of resources on there. They're always, it's under active development. Both Nitrogen, ChicagoBoss, and Zotonic are under very heavy, constant development. So it's, you're always looking for improvements there. So, anybody got any questions about it?